Our guest today for Touch Basin's Hole is an American professor of Korean and Contemporary and Comparative Literature at Yonsei University's Underwood International College. But he's also known as the first person to introduce Brazilian Jiu Jitsu to South Korea in the late 1990s. There are now over 50 Jiu Jitsu academies in Korea under his name. I'm delighted to say that Professor John Frankl joins us now in the studio to tell us more about both his academic and martial arts story. Professor Frankl, hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I understand, that you were born in California in the United States.
Correct.
But you ended up majoring in East Asian languages in college, and now you're a professor of Korean literature in Korea. Can you tell us a bit more about that journey, how you became interested in the Korean language and Korean literature?
Yeah, so a series of coincidences, really. I had no plan. I was an English literature major when I began, and I had to take any foreign language, just for a year to graduate. And I had Spanish in high school, and being from California, Spanish is less a foreign language. It's more like a second language. And I wanted something a little more distant, and I got a lot of recommendations, but Korean kept coming up. So I took Korean my freshman year in college. I took it pass-fail because I did not want it to adversely affect my GPA. I had no intention of continuing. But I liked it enough to where the second semester I took it for a grade. And then I decided to take it for one more year, although I was finished with my requirement. And what happened during my second year was two things. Berkeley started their exchange program with Yonsei the following year, so I decided that I might come here for a year. And I couldn't get any of my English major requirements because the seniors and juniors who had dropped out of sciences were taking those sophomore courses, and they had priority. So at that point, I changed my major.
Right, so it's part, as you said, like part just general interest. But then when did you find your passion for Korean literature?
I didn't have so I was just taking the language, and I certainly didn't have enough language skills to deal with literature for the first, 2 or 3 years. And I think during my third year, I took a course in Korean literature, mostly in translation, but I could do some rudimentary reading in Korean after 2.5, 3 years of instruction. And I liked it, but still, when I finally graduated, it wasn't literature. I mean, you're just really just learning the language at that point. You don't have enough skills to go deep into the literature. Yeah. I didn't really major in literature until I did my MA and PhD.
Okay, so perhaps do you remember the first work of Korean literature that you perhaps not encountered, but the fact that one you appreciated?
Yeah, and it's funny because they're still the ones that I like most. It was the short stories from the 1920s and 1930s, the colonial period short stories, which really struck me. And I'm working more on essays now, but still from the 30s, yeah.
Right, I also read that your area of interest includes poems of Isang.
Not poems, actually. So Isang is famous for his poems, but I won't say I dislike his poems, but I prefer his essays, and I find his essays for my work more rewarding.
What about his essays?
Because unlike the poems, which seem very cryptic to me, almost like his own personal code, the essays are pretty good records. Of course, they're not perfect historical documents, but they're pretty good records of a lot of what was going on in Korean society, or at least Isang's part of Korean society in the 30s, which interests me very much.
Right, and how would you compare it, what you were reading, to perhaps the kind of readings that you were having from Western writers? So
Isang, it's not Korea versus the West, it's Isang versus the world, because he's so idiosyncratic. But so that's one thing to think about. It's not really Korean. With him, it's not so much Korean literature versus American or British or anything else. So he's very unique, which I like. But at the same time, I think he was consciously and deliberately a modernist, and he was definitely influenced by European and maybe to slightly lesser extent, especially through Hollywood movies, American modernism. And so it's a nice hybrid of a very peculiar and idiosyncratic writer on the one hand, but one who's also working deliberately sort of working in a certain, I won't say a field, but a kind of a stream of modernism at the time.
So you've been interested in Korean writers, Korean literature for a long time, back from when there were perhaps not a lot of works that were even available in English at the time. Things have now changed quite a lot, hasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The one thing that hasn't changed or hasn't changed quite as rapidly or as structurally is there certainly are more works available, and there's certainly better translations and more interest. But they tend still, and this was always the case, but they still tend to be based on either the translator's preference or what's popular today, rather than sort of going back and really trying to structure what are the most important works from the 10s and then the 20s and then the 30s. It's more, hey, I really like this author or this work, and it's not bad at all.
Sure.
But it's a bit scattered still.
So you perhaps prefer to see more classical works that can be translated still, to be explored by the Western world?
Right. I mean, it's my bias, though, because I'm doing this academically. I realize that in terms of, popular literature or what may eventually be made into a movie or a Netflix series or whatever, that's not really important. So I totally understand my positionality as a professor and an academic, and it doesn't really suit capitalism or the average people's taste. So I'm not demanding that at all. Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit now, because we can't invite you to the show and not talk about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, as you are known as the person to have brought the martial art to South Korea. In fact, there are now over 50 John Frankl Jiu Jitsu academies across the country. How did you discover the martial art, and what made you want to bring it to Korea?
Yeah, so I didn't want to bring it so much up. So I'm a lifelong martial artist. I was just fascinated since I was a little kid. I don't know exactly why, although I grew up in a family of 4 boys, so there was a lot of fighting going on, so that might be part of it. But none of my other brothers really got into it. They dabbled a little bit. And when I first experienced jiu-jitsu, it was actually coming back from my second trip to Korea. A friend was in Hawaii. I stopped there in 1989. He showed me some of it. He was just a beginner. But I could see how effective it was, and I was hooked from then on. As far as wanting to bring it to Korea, it wasn't that. It was that in 99, 10 years later, I was a brown belt. I had finished all my coursework and examinations for my PhD, and I was coming back to Korea to do a year of dissertation research. And there was no way that I was so addicted. I mean, I was not going to stop training, and there was no one to train with. So somewhat selfishly, I started a small club just to create people good enough to train with. And then it took off from there.
Right, creating that small club initially, was it difficult?
No, because it was on the UFC had come out a couple of years before, and so there was no access to it, but there were Koreans, particularly those who were doing like judo or hapkido, who were like, wow, I really want to try this, but there's no one really doing it. And then so when I showed up, it was, I mean, I'm not sure how quickly, I didn't try to, I'm not sure how quickly I could have built a successful commercial school like a lot of my students have today. I don't think it was that popular. But in terms of just having a club and getting people together, there were always a few people interested. Yeah.
What is it about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that makes it special, that made you want to share it with people, and for people here in Korea to want to try it?
Yeah, so for me, as a lifelong martial artist, it was the almost complete, nothing's perfect, but almost perfect lack of a gap between theory and practice, and then the lack of a gap between how you practice and how you actually use it in a tournament or a fight or a self-defense situation. Every martial art I had done up till then had a very sort of flashy, good-looking practice, and then they either couldn't fight, or when they fought, it looked like bad kickboxing. And just a huge gulf between practice and reality, and jiu-jitsu really is seamless, and that was very attractive to me.
How did it feel to watch your academies flourish like it? It must be quite rewarding to see the seed you've sown grow and flourish like it has.
It is. I mean, like anything, a family or whatever, the bigger it gets, the more potential there is for friction and things like that. But in general, and a lot of people don't know this is, thank you for asking, I don't have a financial interest in any of those academies. They use my name because I'm their teacher, and that's nice. They respect me, and I respect them. But they're all owned by individual. I don't think we have 1 or 2 academies owned by Korean Americans, mostly by just Koreans. And I will come in and do seminars and things like that, or they will come and train with me. But although my name is on the sign, I have no I have no ownership or financial interest in any of those academies.
Sure, but your name is definitely in the history of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in Korea. It is quite a jarring combination, being a professor of Korean literature and also being a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu master on one hand. Even in this interview, the shift we went from one topic to the other was quite jarring. Do you feel that? Do you have any sort of clash?
It's seamless for me because I've always been interested in both, but it does put a lot of people off. What I would say is there's a sacrifice. Like, I will never be the best person at Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, nor will I be the best academic. And a lot of people who are more one-dimensional, it bothers them. Like, you could be so much better as a professor if you would just quit all physical activity, or if you would just quit that professor stuff, you could be a jiu-jitsu world champion. But for me, balance is much more important.
Do they cross over in any way?
I mean, they're both. I mean, jiu-jitsu is very cerebral if you're doing it right. And then as far as the other way, so that's academics to jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu academics, I think it could be jiu-jitsu or yoga or anything that's really good for your health. I mean, part of being a professor is the ability to sit for long periods of time and concentrate. And if your back hurts or your head hurts or, you're tired all the time, that's hard to do. I mean, people think it's all in your brain. I mean, in a sense, a lot of that is in your brain, but it's very physical. I mean, your brain is housed in your body. So, I mean, if your body's failing you, it's hard to do academic work as well.
Have you ever crossed perhaps students from one to the other? For example, a Korean literature student who went on to do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or the other way around?
I don't know about Korean literature, but Yonsei students will often, there's a club, a joint like Yonsei Ihwa club. And I think they train at Yonsei still. And so like a lot of Yonsei students will start there. And, if they're not that interested, that's I don't think they pay almost nothing, a little association fee. And they don't train that much. But then if they are very interested from there, they can go to a school and train every day. So, I mean, I don't know about anyone directly through my influence, but it happens all the time. I mean, these Yonsei students know that I'm everything started at a Yonsei club. And so the Yonsei club has that kind of history, yeah.
So the students perhaps don't look at you funny, your Korean literature students, they're knowing that you're a jiu-jitsu master as well.
Half of them know. I think the ones who are interested enough to Google me, they all know. And the ones who are just kind of like, oh, this is a requirement, I just have to go take it. I don't even know who the teacher is. They might not know.
Well, it's been fascinating to learn about your story, and it really seems like you have perhaps acted as an effective bridge between both Korean and Western cultures through your double passion. What's next for you? What are your plans for 2023 and beyond as well?
Yeah, so I actually sort of ceased all official jiu-jitsu activities for 3 years because of COVID. So, I mean, we kept training, but for 1 year, 3 years ago, I said, look, there's no requirement for seminars, no requirement for training. And then I extended that to 2 years because it was still bad. And then I extended it for 3 years, and we've started that again. So I really don't know. We're just starting to like post-COVID ramping back up, but a lot of gyms were opened in those 3 years. So I'm getting the feeling I'll have a much more active sort of seminar schedule. Now we have a lot more gyms outside of Seoul as well. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. It's always I schedule it for the weekends when I'm not teaching at Yonsei, and it's a good little break.
Sure. Well, I'm sure your students will be glad to see you back out there teaching again. We really appreciate your time today, and thank you for sharing the story with us. We've been talking to Professor John Frankl. Yeah. Thank you again, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you for having me.